My father's 60th birthday. My sister ripped the leg brace off my 6-year-old daughter and screamed, "Stop acting crippled. You just want pity?" My entire family watched and laughed. They laughed as she hit the floor and begged for help. Not one of them moved. Not one of them cared. None of them knew her surgeon was standing right behind them. Having seen everything, he stepped forward, put a hand on my sister's shoulder, and said 6 words that erased every smirk in the room. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Walter Cole's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. The afternoon sun cut through the windshield at an angle that made him squint. But he didn't reach for his sunglasses. He'd been driving this same stretch of Tennessee back roads for 30 minutes now, and with each passing mile marker, the knot in his stomach pulled tighter. 2 years? It had been 2 full years since he'd seen most of these people. The divorce had done that, not the actual legal process, which had been mercifully quick and relatively civil. No, it was what came after. The holidays that turned into interrogations, the family gatherings where Alice's relatives treated him like a defendant awaiting sentencing, the constant dripping judgment that wore him down like water on stone. "Dad," Maddie's voice pulled him back. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter, who sat in the back seat with her small hands resting on her lap. She wore a blue dress with white flowers that she'd picked out herself, and her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that Alice had helped with during the custody exchange that morning. "Yes. Sweetheart, are you okay?" Walter forced his face into something resembling a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking about Grandpa's party." "About Grandpa's party?" he confirmed. Maddie was quiet for a moment, then softer. "Will it hurt if we walk a lot?" Walter felt his chest tighten. He checked the mirror again and saw his daughter's hand move her left leg, fingers brushing over the white plastic brace that ran from her ankle to just below her knee. The brace that she'd worn for 8 months now. The brace that still had 6 more months to go, according to Dr. Holloway. "I won't let it hurt," Walter said, and he meant it. "We can sit as much as you want, and if it gets bad, we leave. Deal? Deal?" Somerset Hollow appeared ahead like a memory he'd tried to forget. The town hadn't changed. Same weathered church steeples breaking the tree line. Same gravel side roads that kicked up dust behind every passing truck. Same worn-out storefronts on Main Street that had been closing and reopening under different names for as long as Walter could remember. It wasn't the place that made him dread this visit. The town itself was fine, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of place where nothing much happened and people liked it that way. It was the people. Specifically, it was the Coulsons, Alice's family. His ex-wife came from a large, loud clan that valued appearances over truth and dominance over kindness. They were the type of people who talked over each other at dinner tables and never apologized for anything because they genuinely believed they were never wrong. And at the center of that family, like a black hole pulling everything into her orbit, was Kendra Coulson, Alice's older sister. 42 years old, never worked a day. She didn't absolutely have to, and never met a boundary she didn't immediately try to cross. She had opinions about everything and empathy for nothing. Walter had once watched her tell a cousin with stage 3 lymphoma to stop dwelling on it and think positive thoughts instead. The cousin died 6 months later. Kendra never acknowledged it. Walter's jaw clenched at the memory. He'd agreed to come today for one reason and one reason only. Maddie had asked. His daughter, who rarely asked for anything, who tried so hard to be good and polite and not cause problems, had looked at him with those wide brown eyes and said, "Please, Daddy, it's Grandpa's birthday. I miss him." So, here they were. The Somerset Community Lodge sat at the edge of town, a single-story brick building with a gravel parking lot, and a wooden sign out front that someone had repainted badly. Walter pulled into a spot near the back, taking his time turning off the engine. Through the windows, he could already see people moving around inside. "Too many people ready?" he asked Maddie. She nodded, but he saw the hesitation in her face. She was 6 years old and already learning to read rooms, to measure reactions, to prepare herself for the casual cruelty that some people mistook for humor. Walter got out and opened her door. Maddie took his hand, and together they walked across the gravel. He could hear her brace clicking slightly with each step, a soft plastic sound that was becoming familiar. She moved carefully, deliberately, the way kids do when they're carrying something fragile. The door opened before they reached it. Walter's mother stood there, her face breaking into a genuine smile that made something in his chest unclench slightly. "There you are," she said, pulling him into a hug. And there's my beautiful girl. She bent down to Maddie's level, and Walter watched his daughter's face light up. His parents at least had never been the problem. They'd stayed neutral during the divorce, loved both him and Alice without taking sides, and treated Maddie like the precious thing she was. Inside, the lodge smelled like coffee and whatever castles people had brought in crock-pots. Folding tables lined the walls, covered in paper tablecloths and mismatched dishes. Streamers hung from the ceiling in blue and silver, his father's favorite colors. Someone had blown up balloons that were already starting to sag in the warm air. Walter's father spotted them and came over immediately. He was 73 now, thinner than Walter remembered, but his handshake was still firm. "Glad you made it." "Son," he said quietly. Then to Maddie, "And how's my favorite granddaughter?" "I'm your only granddaughter?" "Grandpa, that just makes you more special." Maddie giggled, and for a moment, Walter let himself believe this might be okay. Maybe the Coulsons would stay on their side of the room. Maybe Kendra would be too busy holding court somewhere to pay attention to them. Maybe they could just eat some cake, sing happy birthday, and leave without incident. Then he saw her. Kendra stood near the drink table talking to someone Walter didn't recognize. She wore a loud floral blouse and jeans that were too tight, and her voice carried across the room, even though she wasn't shouting. She had that quality, that ability to dominate space just by existing in it. She turned, scanned the room, and her eyes landed on Walter and Maddie. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, more like recognition of prey. She started walking toward them. Walter felt his body tense. His mother must have noticed because she put a hand on his arm and said very softly, "Don't." But Kendra was already there, her perfume arriving 2 steps before she did. Something floral and overwhelming that made Walter want to step back. Well, she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for nearby people to hear. "Look who decided to show up." "Kendra," Walter said flatly. She ignored him entirely and focused on Maddie. Her eyes traveled down to the brace and her mouth pursed like she'd tasted something sour. "You still letting her wear that thing?" Kendra asked, tapping the top of Maddie's brace with the toe of her shoe. The world narrowed. Walter felt heat rush up his neck. His nostrils flared as he took a breath that was supposed to be calming, but just made him angrier. "It's medically necessary," he said through his teeth. Kendra waved her hand dismissively. "It's dramatic. Kids heal fast. She doesn't need all this." She gestured vaguely at Maddie. "Attention." Walter opened his mouth to respond, but Kendra had already turned away. Her attention shifting to someone else like Maddie and her medical equipment were just minor irritations she'd already forgotten about. This was the Coulsons in a nutshell. No curiosity about why a 6-year-old needed a leg brace. No questions about the surgery or the recovery timeline or the physical therapy appointments twice a week. Just immediate confident dismissal of anything that required empathy or understanding. Walter's mother squeezed his arm again. "Come on," she said. "Let's get some food." The next hour passed in a blur of forced politeness. Walter stayed close to Maddie, watching her navigate the room with that same careful apologetic quality she developed over the past year. She smiled at relatives who barely acknowledged her. She said, "Please and thank you." When adults handed her things, she tried so hard to be good, to be invisible, to not cause problems. It broke Walter's heart. Alice arrived late, slipping in through the side door like she was hoping no one would notice. She looked tired, thinner than she'd been during the marriage. She caught Walter's eye across the room and gave him a small nod. Not quite friendly, not quite hostile, just acknowledgement. They've been doing better lately. The two of them, the custody arrangement was working. They communicated through text about schedules and school events. They were never going to be friends, but they'd at least stop being enemies. But Alice's family was a different story. Walter was talking to his father near the birthday cake when he heard Maddie scream. The sound cut through every conversation in the room like a knife. Walter spun around, his heart already racing, and saw something that would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. Kendra stood over Maddie holding the leg brace in her hands. She'd ripped it off, just grabbed it and yanked it free from the Velcro straps. "Stop pretending you're hurt," Kendra shouted, her face red. "You like attention?" Mattie's leg buckled without the brace to support it. Her knee gave out immediately, and she fell forward onto the wooden floor with a sound that made Walter's stomach turn. "Dad," Maddie cried out, her voice raw with pain. "I can't stand. I can't." Walter was moving before he finished processing what he'd seen. But the room had gone completely silent, and in that silence, he heard something that stopped him. Cold laughter, not from everyone, but from enough people. Nervous laughter scattered around the room like shrapnel. Someone near the back even giggled. Walter's vision tunneled. He looked around the room and saw his entire former family frozen in place. His ex-wife had her hand over her mouth, but not in horror. In embarrassment, like Maddie's crying was a social problem to be managed. Kendra stood over his daughter, still holding the brace, looking almost triumphant. And not one person moved to help, not Alice's mother, who stood by the drink table with her arms crossed, not Alice's younger brother, who just stared at his phone, not any of the cousins or aunts or uncles who filled this room. They all just stood there watching a 6-year-old girl cry on the floor and did absolutely nothing. Then a voice from near the door said, "You just seriously injured a recovering child." Walter turned. "Doctor?" Reed Holloway stood in the entrance, still wearing his jacket from being outside. He must have just arrived. His face was pale, his mouth set in a hard line, and his eyes were fixed on Kendra with an expression that Walter had never seen on the usually mild-mannered surgeon. Reed moved quickly across the room and knelt beside Maddie. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "I've got you. Can you tell me where it hurts?"
"My knee,"
Maddie sobbed. "It hurts really bad." Reed's hands moved over her leg with practiced efficiency, checking the joint, testing the movement. Walter finally broke from his frozen state and dropped down beside them. "Is she—" his voice cracked. "Is she okay? We need to get her somewhere I can examine her properly," Reed said. His voice was calm, but Walter could hear the anger underneath it. The doctor looked up at Kendra, who still hadn't moved. "What were you thinking?" "She was faking," Kendra said, but some of the confidence had drained from her voice. "Kids fake injuries for attention all the time. She has a documented medical condition," Reed said, standing up slowly. He was a tall man, and when he rose to his full height, even Kendra took a step back. She had corrective surgery 8 months ago for a congenital tibial torsion. That brace is the only thing preventing her bones from reforming incorrectly. "You could have—" He stopped himself, visibly trying to control his temper. "You could have undone months of healing." The room was so quiet. Walter could hear the clock ticking on the far wall. Alice finally moved. She came over, her face white. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, though Walter wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. "We're leaving?" Walter said. His voice came out flat. Emotionless, he scooped Maddie into his arms, careful of her leg. Reed handed him the brace. Walter carried his daughter toward the door. His parents followed immediately. Behind him, he heard Kendra start to say something. But someone, maybe Alice's father, cut her off. Walter didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd already seen everything he needed to see. The Coulson family had just shown him with perfect clarity exactly who they were. They'd stood there while someone assaulted his child. And they'd laughed. They'd watched her fall and cry out in pain. And they'd done nothing. Not one of them had moved to help her. Not one. As Walter pushed through the door into the fading afternoon light, carrying his sobbing daughter, something inside him went cold and quiet and decided this family was dead to him. They just didn't know it yet. The drive home was silent, except for Maddie's occasional sniffle from the back seat. Walter had reattached her brace as gently as he could in the parking lot, his hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. She'd whimpered during the process, and each sound she made felt like a knife between his ribs. Now she was asleep or pretending to be. Her small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers where he'd reached back to hold her. The pressure was light but constant, a reminder that she was there, that she needed him to be steady. Walter drove without music. The headlights cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the white lines on the road and nothing else. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming a tunnel overhead. He wasn't crying. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even processing what had happened yet. Not really. His mind had moved past the shock and horror and landed somewhere much colder. Somewhere calculating. He didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. He didn't want to hurt anyone physically or destroy their property or do anything that would land him in legal trouble. He had Maddie to think about. He had custody arrangements and child support and a life that needed to remain stable. But he wanted consequences. Real consequences. The kind that stick. The kind that make people understand with absolute clarity that actions have weight. And weight has meaning and meaning has cost. The kind that break things that can't be fixed. Maddie stirred in the back seat. "Dad, I'm here. Baby. Is Dr. Holloway mad at me?" The question hit Walter like a physical blow. He blinked hard against the sudden burning in his eyes. "No, sweetheart. He's not mad at you. He could never be mad at you. But I cause a scene." And Kendra said, "I always cause scenes." Walter's hands tightened on the wheel. He took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Maddie, Listen to me. What happened today was not your fault. Not even a little bit. You didn't do anything wrong. You understand the silence from the back seat. Then, very quietly, okay, but Walter could hear the doubt in her voice. Could hear her trying to process why an adult would hurt her. Trying to find a way. It must have been her fault. Because surely adults don't just hurt kids for no reason. He'd fix that. He'd make sure she understood. But not tonight. Tonight, she just needed to feel safe. They pulled into the driveway of Walter's small rental house at the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen that leaked when it rained hard. A yard that was mostly dirt. But it was theirs. No one could walk in uninvited. No one could make Maddie feel small or wrong or broken. Walter carried her inside and tucked her into bed without making her change into pajamas. She was already half asleep again, exhausted from the pain and fear and crying. "Love you, Daddy," she mumbled. "Love you too, baby. So much." He sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out. Then he sat there a while longer, watching her sleep, memorizing the way her face looked peaceful when the world wasn't hurting her. Finally, Walter stood and walked to the kitchen. He made coffee even though it was past 9. Then he sat at his small table with a notebook and a pen and started writing. Not a rant, not an angry letter full of curses and threats. A plan. Walter had always been good at solving problems. It was what he did for a living. He was a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, and his entire job was finding efficient solutions to complicated situations. He understood systems. He understood cause and effect. He understood how to identify weak points and apply the right pressure. The Coulson family was a system, and like all systems, it had vulnerabilities. He wrote for 2 hours, filling pages with notes. Family dynamics, relationships, weak links, points of leverage. He thought about Kendra's marriage, which everyone knew was rocky. He thought about Alice's mother, who valued reputation above all else. He thought about the younger generation of Coulsons who'd grown up watching Kendra's cruelty, but never quite had the courage to challenge it. And he thought about documentation. Evidence, official records that couldn't be argued away or dismissed. By the time Walter finished, his coffee was cold, and the notebook contained a complete map of exactly how to dismantle a family without throwing a single punch. The next morning, Walter called Dr. Holloway's office as soon as it opened. "I need to bring Maddie in," he said. "Today, if possible." The receptionist, recognizing his voice, immediately said, "Let me check with the doctor." 2 minutes later, Reed himself came on the line. "Walter, how is she?" "She's hurting. She cried herself to sleep." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you bring her in at 11? I'll work you in." "We'll be there." The doctor's office was in a medical building 20 minutes away. Walter had been there so many times over the past 8 months that the nurses knew him by name. Maddie clutched his hand as they walked in, limping slightly despite the brace. Reed saw them immediately. He took Maddie into an exam room while Walter waited outside, giving his daughter privacy for the examination. Through the door, Walter could hear Reed's gentle voice asking questions, Mattie's soft answers, the clinical sounds of medical equipment. 15 minutes later, Reed opened the door and gestured for Walter to come in. Maddie sat on the exam table swinging her good leg. Her face was blotchy from crying, but she gave Walter a small, brave smile. Reed's face was serious. He stood with his arms crossed, and Walter noticed he was holding a manila folder. "The good news," Reed said, "is that there doesn't appear to be any fracture or complete tear of the ligaments. The bad news is there's significant swelling around the knee joint and what I believe is a moderate strain to the medial collateral ligament." "What does that mean?" Walter asked. "It means he's going to be in more pain for the next few weeks. It means we need to be extra careful with the brace, and it means," Reed paused, choosing his words carefully, "that what happened yesterday could have been much worse. If the angle had been different, if your daughter had fallen differently, we could be looking at surgery to repair torn ligaments or even damage to the growth plate." Walter felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She could have been permanently injured." "Yes," Reed said simply. He opened the manila folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "I've documented everything in her medical file. The injury, the cause, and my professional assessment of the risk that was created. I'm also required by law to file a report with the state because this qualifies as an injury to a minor caused by an adult." Reed held out a copy of the report. Walter took it with hands that weren't quite steady. There it was, official documented, Kendra's name in black and white, along with a clinical description of the assault and its consequences. "I want to be clear," Reed continued, "that this isn't about punishment. It's about protecting Maddie. If this situation escalates, if anyone tries to claim that her injury is somehow fabricated or exaggerated, we now have contemporaneous medical documentation proving otherwise. Walter looked down at the papers in his hands, at his daughter's name, at the date and time of the incident, at Reed's signature and medical license number, making it all official and real and permanent. "Thank you," Walter said quietly. Reed's expression softened. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Truly, no parent should have to." After they left the doctor's office, Walter took Maddie to get ice cream. Even though it was barely noon, she ordered chocolate with sprinkles and ate it slowly while Walter pretended not to watch her W's every time she shifted her leg. "Does it hurt a lot?" he asked. "It's okay," she said automatically. "Maddie, the truth?" She bit her lip. "Yeah, it hurts." "Then we'll take it easy today. No running around, just rest." "Will I have to see Aunt Kendra again?" Walter looked at his daughter, at her worried face, at the ice cream melting in her cup, at the white brace peeking out from under her pants. "No," he said. "You won't." "Promise." "I promise." That night, after Maddie was asleep, Walter sat down at his kitchen table again. This time, he didn't write plans. He wrote a letter. It took him 3 drafts to get it right. The first was too angry. The second was too long. The third was exactly what it needed to be. Clear, direct, and absolutely final. He printed it on clean white paper. He didn't sign it with any platitudes or false hopes, just his name at the bottom. The next day was Saturday. Walter drove to Alice's house in the late afternoon. She lived in a small ranch-style place on the north side of town. Split level with a maple tree in the front yard that had been there since they'd looked at the house together years ago. Walter parked on the street. He walked up to the front door with the envelope in his hand, knocked twice, and waited. Alice answered. She was wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, her hair pulled back. She looked surprised to see him. "Walter, we don't have an exchange today. Do we?" "No, I just need to give you this." He held out the envelope. Alice took it slowly, her eyes searching his face. "What is it?" "It's what happens now," Walter said simply. "Can we talk about—" "No," Walter interrupted. "Read it first. Then you can decide if there's anything to talk about." Alice's mouth tightened, but she nodded. Walter turned and walked back to his car without looking back. He heard the door close behind him. He drove home. He gave Maddie dinner and helped her with her homework and let her watch one episode of her favorite cartoon before bed. He was present and patient and calm because she needed him to be those things. But inside, he was counting down the hours until Alice read the letter, until the words he'd written spread like poison through the Coulson family system, exposing every fracture line, widening every crack, until they understood what they'd done and what it was going to cost them. His phone rang at 9:30, Alice's name on the screen. Walter answered, but didn't speak first. "Walter." Her voice was tight. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You're talking about keeping Maddie away from my entire family." "Not your entire family? Just the people who hurt her and the people who stood by and watched her. That's almost everyone." "Yes," Walter said calmly. "It is. You can't do this? She has grandparents, cousins. She has a grandmother who watched her get assaulted and did nothing. She has cousins who laughed. Alice. They laughed when our daughter was crying on the floor. Silence on the other end. Then quieter. I know. Do you? Because you covered your face like you were embarrassed? Not horrified. Not protective. Embarrassed. That's not. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. You could have helped her," Walter said, and his voice came out hotter than he intended. "You could have told your sister to back off. You could have picked her daughter up off the floor. You could have done anything except stand there covering your face while she cried for help." He heard Alice's breath catch. For a moment, he thought she might cry. But when she spoke again, her voice was steady. "What you're asking is impossible. You're asking me to choose between my daughter and my family." "No," Walter corrected. "Your sister already made you choose. She assaulted Maddie. She literally ripped off a medical device and injured a recovering child. I'm just making sure that choice has consequences. She made a mistake. She made a choice. There's a difference. Walter, please, we can work this out. Kendra can apologize. I don't want her apology. I don't want anything from her. I want her nowhere near my daughter, and anyone who can't understand why is equally unwelcome. You're tearing this family apart." Walter felt something sharp and bitter rise in his throat. "No, Alice. Craw did that. And you all watched. I'm just making it official. What about me?" Her voice cracked. "Where do I fit in all this?" "That's up to you," Walter said. You saw what happened. You know what they're capable of, and you're still defending them. I'm not defending... Yes, you are. You've been on the phone for 5 minutes trying to convince me to let it go, to give them another chance, to let Maddie be around people who think hurting her is acceptable. So, you tell me, Alice, where do you fit? Silence stretched between them. Walter could hear Alice breathing, could almost hear her thinking, weighing her loyalties. Finally, she said, I need time. You have all the time you want, but until you figure it out, the custody agreement stands exactly as written, and the boundaries in that letter are non-negotiable. What if Kendra tries to see her anyway? What if she shows up at school, or then I document it and take it to court? I have a medical report from a licensed physician stating that your sister injured our daughter. I have witnesses. I have evidence. If she comes anywhere near Maddie, I'll make sure every relevant authority knows about it. He heard Alice make a small choke sound. I'm sorry it's come to this, Walter said, and he meant it. But I will not let anyone hurt our daughter. Not even your family. Not even you if it comes to that. You'd really take her away from me if you can't keep her safe. Yes. In a heartbeat. The call ended shortly after. Walter sat down his phone and realized his hand was shaking. Not from fear, from the sheer weight of what he'd just done. He'd drawn a line, an absolute boundary. And once you draw a line like that, once you make it clear that there are consequences for crossing it, everything changes. You can't go back. You can only move forward and see who follows and who stays behind. Walter checked on Maddie one more time before going to bed. She was curled on her side, hugging her stuffed rabbit, breathing soft and even innocent, trusting that the adults in her life would protect her. He would not let her down again, not ever. The Coulson family had always needed an enemy. Walter had watched it happen throughout his marriage. They'd circle around whatever target had drawn their collective disdain. A cousin who'd gotten divorced, an aunt who'd gained weight, a nephew who dropped out of college, and they'd tear into them with jokes that weren't quite jokes and concern that wasn't quite concern. It was how they bonded, how they established their hierarchy. There was always someone at the bottom of their social ladder, and everyone else could feel better about themselves by pointing and laughing. For the past 2 years, Walter had been that target. But now the target had moved and Kendra was discovering what it felt like to be on the receiving end. Walter heard about it in pieces. Over the following week, his mother called first. I need you to know something, she said without preamble. Alice's mother called me today. She's furious about the letter, about a lot of things. Apparently, Kendra is saying you're keeping Maddie away to be controlling, that you're using what happened as an excuse to isolate her from the family. Walter felt his jaw tighten. And what's Alice's mother saying? That Alice needs to fight you on this. That family comes first. That Kendra just got a little carried away and everyone needs to forgive and move on. Of course, that's what she's saying. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then, Walter, I need you to understand something. I'm not calling to convince you to change your mind. I'm calling because I want you to know that your father and I support your decision. What Kendra did was inexcusable. Something in Walter's chest loosened slightly. Thank you. But I also need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. The Coulsons are closing ranks. They're painting you as the villain. Let them, Walter said. I'm not the one who assaulted a 6-year-old. The next call came from an unexpected source. Alice's younger brother, Jason. Hey, he said when Walter answered. Is this a bad time? Depends on what you're calling about. I wanted to... Jason paused, sounding uncomfortable. Look, I'm not good at this kind of thing, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for not helping. At the party, Walter waited. I should have done something. Jason continued. I saw what happened and I just froze. And then everyone was looking at their phones or at each other and not at Maddie. And by the time I processed it, you were already leaving. Why are you telling me this? Walter asked. Because I want to know if I can still see her sometimes. Maddie, I know you're keeping her away from most of the family. But I thought, I don't know, maybe there's a way. Walter considered this. Jason had always been a quiet one in the Coulson clan, overshadowed by his louder siblings, often dismissed or ignored. Walter had actually liked him back when family gatherings were something he attended. Maybe, Walter said, finally, but not right now, and not if you're going to report back to Kendra or your mother about what Maddie is doing. I won't, I swear. We'll see. By the end of the first week, the cracks in the Coulson family were starting to show publicly. Walter heard from mutual friend that there had been a situation at Alice's mother's house. Voices raised loud enough for neighbors to hear. Doors slamming. The second week brought more details. Kendra's husband, Tom, had apparently told several people that he was done making excuses for his wife, that he'd watched her bully family members for years, and he was tired of cleaning up after her cruelty. Alice called midway through week 3. "I need to tell you something," she said. She sounded exhausted. "Okay. Kendra came to my house yesterday. She wanted me to help her convince you to drop the boundaries to let Maddie come to the 4th of July barbecue. What did you tell her?" I told her no. Walter was genuinely surprised. No, Alice repeated. "I told her what she did was wrong, that I couldn't defend it anymore, that maybe you were right about consequences." How'd she take it? Alice laughed bitterly. "She called me a traitor, said I was choosing you over family. Then she left, and I haven't heard from her since." "I'm sorry," Walter said, and meant it. "Don't be. I should have done it years ago." Alice was quiet for a moment. "My mother isn't speaking to me either. By the way, she says I'm letting you manipulate me. Are you—" "No. I'm finally seeing things clearly. The 4th of July came and went. Walter and Maddie spent it watching fireworks from Hill outside town. Just the two of them and a blanket spread on the grass. She held his hand during the loud parts, and they ate convenience store snacks, and she fell asleep in the car on the way home. It was perfect. Around that same time, Walter's mother reported that the Coulson family barbecue had been tense. Kendra had shown up despite multiple people telling her not to. There had been arguments. Someone, Alice's mother, had defended Kendra and blamed Walter for everything. Jason had apparently pushed back, which led to more fighting. The gathering ended early. Several people left before dessert. Week 6 brought the text message Walter had been waiting for. Unknown number. Short and simple. "This is Tom. Can we talk?" Walter called the number. Tom Briggs answered on the first ring. "Thanks for calling back," Tom said. "What do you want to talk about?" Tom took a breath. "I'm leaving Kendra." Walter hadn't expected that because of what happened with Maddie. That was the last straw, but if I'm being honest, I should have left years ago. She's not a good person. Walter. I've been making excuses for her because she's my wife, and I thought that's what you're supposed to do. But she hurt a kid. She hurt your kid, and she doesn't even think she did anything wrong. She doesn't, Walter agreed. "I wanted you to know," Tom continued, "that I told my lawyer about what happened about the assault. I want it on record in case we have custody issues with our own kids." Walter felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "How are your kids handling it?" "They're relieved. They've been scared of their mom for a while now." After the call ended, Walter sat in his quiet house and thought about systems, about pressure points, about how sometimes the smallest action in the right place can bring down an entire structure. He hadn't told Tom to leave Kendra, hadn't suggested it or encouraged it or even planted the seed. He'd just drawn a boundary around his daughter and enforced it without apology. Everything else was people making their own choices based on information they'd always had but were finally paying attention to. The 8th week brought another unexpected development. Alice's father, a man Walter had barely spoken to during the marriage, called him. "I owe you an apology," he said without introduction, "for what happened at the party, for not stopping it." "Thank you," Walter said carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about that day, about how we all just stood there. And I'm ashamed, Walter. I'm 71 years old, and I'm ashamed of myself for not protecting a little girl when she needed it. It's not too late to do better," Walter offered. "That's why I'm calling. I want to see Maddie. I know I'm probably on your list of people who aren't welcome, but I thought I should ask." Walter considered. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." 3 days later, Walter brought Maddie to a park where Alice's father was waiting. They'd agreed on a public place. 1 hour, Walter would stay the whole time. The old man brought Maddie's favorite cookies and didn't try to make excuses or explain away what had happened. He just apologized directly to her using words she could understand. "I should have helped you when you got hurt," he said, "and I'm very sorry I didn't." Maddie looked at her grandfather for a long moment. Then she said, "It's okay. Grandpa, Dad says people make mistakes sometimes." Walter's throat tightened. After that, visits with Alice's father became a regular thing. Not frequent, but consistent. The old man never asked about Kendra or tried to broker any kind of reconciliation. He just showed up when he said he would and treated Maddie with the gentle respect she deserved. By September, 4 months after the incident, the Coulson family had effectively split into factions. There were the people who still defended Kendra, primarily her mother and a handful of cousins who had always been in her inner circle. There were the people who distanced themselves but hadn't explicitly condemned her, a larger group that included most of the extended family. And there were the people who cut ties with her entirely. Tom and their children, Jason, Alice's father, and surprisingly, Alice herself. Walter watched it all happen from a distance. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, didn't even talk about it much. He just kept Maddie safe and let the Coulsons discover what happened when their scapegoat refused to participate anymore. The call he'd been both expecting and dreading came on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. "This is Kendra," the voice said. "Please, I need to talk to you just once." Walter almost hung up. His finger actually hovered over the end call button, but something made him pause. Maybe curiosity. Maybe his sense that this was the final chapter that needed to be written. "Where?" he asked. "There's a diner on Route 12. The one with the blue sign? Can you meet me there tomorrow at noon?" "I'll think about it," Walter said and ended the call. He did think about it. Spent most of that night turning it over in his mind. Part of him wanted nothing to do with her. Part of him wanted to hear what she had to say. Not because he was interested in reconciliation. That door had closed permanently. But because he wanted to understand if she'd learned anything. If she'd changed at all. In the end, he decided to go. The diner was exactly as Kendra had described. Small, locally owned. Blue sign out front. Walter arrived 5 minutes early and took a booth near the back where he could see the door. Kendra came in at noon exactly. She looked different. Smaller somehow, though she'd always been a large woman. Her face was drawn, her hair pulled back messily. She wore a plain t-shirt and jeans. No jewelry, no makeup. None of the armor she usually presented to the world. She slid into the booth across from him without asking permission. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. A waitress came by and they both ordered coffee they wouldn't drink. Finally, Kendra said, "Thank you for coming." Walter didn't respond. "I wanted to..." She stopped. Started again. "I made a mistake. You assaulted my daughter. I know. Do you? Because you spent months telling everyone she was faking. That I was the problem. That this was all about me being controlling." Kendra's eyes filled with tears. Walter had never seen her cry before. It was unsettling. "I was wrong," she said about all of it. "I was angry and defensive, and I couldn't admit that I'd done something terrible because then I'd have to face it, and I couldn't face it. And now I've lost everything." Her voice cracked. "Tom left, took the kids. My mother barely speaks to me. Most of the family won't take my calls. Alice told me last week that she's embarrassed to be related to me." Walter sipped his coffee, waited. "You did this?" Kendra said, and there was a flash of the old anger in her eyes. "You turned everyone against me." "No," Walter said calmly. "You did that to yourself? I just refused to let you hurt my daughter without consequences. But you wanted this. You wanted me to suffer. I wanted Maddie to be safe. Everything else is just people making their own choices about who you are and what they're willing to tolerate." Kendra wiped her eyes with a napkin. "So what now? You got what you wanted. I'm alone. I'm the villain. Everyone hates me." Walter sat down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "This is not about you getting punished enough or suffering the right amount or paying some kind of debt. This is about my daughter never having to be afraid that someone will hurt her and get away with it. That's all it's ever been about? So, there's nothing I can do. No way to fix this. With me, no. With Maddie, never. But with the rest of your family," Walter shrugged. "That's between you and them. Maybe if you actually take responsibility instead of playing the victim, some of them will eventually forgive you. I don't know. That's not my problem. You don't care at all, do you? About what happens to me?" "No," Walter said honestly. "I don't..." Kendra stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time, like she'd expected him to eventually soften, to show mercy, to give her the redemption arc she wanted. But Walter had no mercy left for her. He'd use it all up keeping his daughter's world safe and stable, while Kendra's crumbled. He stood up, pulled out his wallet, and left a $10 bill on the table for the coffee they hadn't drunk. "This is the last conversation we will ever have," he said. Kendra opened her mouth to respond, but Walter was already walking toward the door. He didn't look back. Not when she called his name. Not when he heard her start to cry. Not ever. He got in his car, drove to Maddie's school, and waited in the pickup line like every other parent. When she came out, her backpack bouncing, her brace clicking softly, her face lighting up when she saw him. Everything else fell away. "How was school?" he asked as she climbed in. "Good. We did science experiments. Can we get ice cream?" "Sure thing, baby." And that was it. That was everything. The Coulsons could fracture and fight and rebuild or not rebuild. Kendra could spend years trying to understand what had happened and why. Alice could navigate her family's judgment and her own guilt. None of it was Walter's problem anymore. He'd closed that chapter, locked that door, walked away without looking back. and he felt nothing but peace. 1 year later, spring arrived in Tennessee with dogwood blooms and temperatures that finally convinced people winter was over. Maddie stood backstage at Somerset Elementary, fidgeting with her dress. She wasn't nervous about the performance. She'd practiced her lines for the school play 100 times. She was nervous because today was the first day she'd performed without a brace. Dr. Holloway had removed it 3 weeks earlier. 14 months of wearing it, 14 months of physical therapy and careful movements and explaining to new friends why her leg looked different. And now it was done. "You're going to do great," Walter said, straightening her collar. "What if I fall?" "Then you get up." "But you won't fall." "How do you know?" "Because you're strong, stronger than you think." She hugged him tight, then ran off to join her classmates. Walter made his way to the audience seating area, finding a spot near the back. The auditorium was filling up with parents and siblings and grandparents all clutching phones to record their kids' moments of glory. "Is this seat taken?" Walter looked up. Reed Holloway stood there wearing a button-down shirt and slacks instead of his usual medical attire. "You came," Walter said, surprised. "Maddie invited me." "How could I say no?" Reed sat down. "How's she doing?" "Nervous?" "Excited?" "Adjusting to not having the brace." "She's going to do great. Her recovery has been textbook perfect." The lights dimmed. The curtain opened. Kids shuffled onto the stage in homemade costumes. And the play began. Maddie appeared in Act 2. She delivered her lines clearly, moved across the stage without hesitation, and at one point had to run. Actually run to catch a pretend butterfly. She didn't fall. She didn't even stumble. Walter felt his eyes burn and blinked hard. Reed, sitting beside him, said quietly, "Told you she was strong?" After the performance, parents crowded backstage to collect their young actors. Walter found Maddie surrounded by classmates, all talking over each other about who'd forgotten their lines and who'd almost dropped a prop. She saw him and her face split into the biggest smile he'd ever seen. "Did you see?" "I ran. I saw. You were perfect."
"Doctor?"
Reed came. "I know. He's waiting outside." They collected her things and made their way to the parking lot. Reed was leaning against his car, checking his phone. "Dr. Reed." Maddie ran up to him, ran without thinking about it, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't have missed it." He looked at Walter over Mattie's head. "You two have plans?" "I was thinking we could grab dinner. My treat." They ended up at a family restaurant with checkered tablecloths and a menu that had too many options. Maddie ordered chicken fingers and spent most of the meal talking about the play, about her friends, about everything except leg braces and hospitals and the hard year they'd all survived. It was perfect. As they were finishing dessert, Walter saw a familiar figure walk in, Alice. She spotted them immediately and hesitated, clearly unsure if she was intruding. Walter made eye contact and nodded toward their table. Alice came over slowly. She looked better than she had a year ago, less tired, more centered. "Hi." "Mommy," Maddie said. "We're celebrating, I heard. Congratulations on the play." Alice looked at Walter. "I wasn't sure. I didn't know if you want me to come." "We saved you a seat," Walter said, and meant it. Alice slid into the booth next to Maddie. The conversation continued, now including both parents, and Walter realized something. They built something new here. Not a traditional family. Not the kind anyone could have predicted a year ago, but a family nonetheless. Reed drove off after dinner with a wave. Walter and Alice stood in the parking lot while Maddie ran circles around a lamppost, testing her leg, pushing boundaries that had once been rigid and painful. "How's your family?" Walter asked. Alice's face tightened slightly. "Complicated. My father asks about Maddie constantly. Jason comes by sometimes. My mother and I are talking barely. And Kendra. I haven't spoken to her in 8 months. Last I heard, she moved to Kentucky. New job. Fresh start. Good for her?" Alice studied his face. "Do you ever think about that day? About what happened?" "Every time I look at Maddie," Walter said. "Honestly, but not because I'm angry anymore. Because I'm grateful. Grateful that I got the chance to choose her. To put her first, to show her that boundaries matter and that people who love you will protect you, not hurt you." Alice nodded slowly. "I think about it. Too. About how I failed her. How I was so worried about keeping peace that I forgot to keep her safe. You're doing better now. Thanks to you. You forced me to see things clearly." Maddie ran up slightly out of breath. "Can we go to the park just for a little while?" They ended up at the playground as the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. Maddie climbed and swung and ran, her movements confident and free. Alice pushed her on the swings while Walter watched from bench. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Saw pictures from the play on Facebook. She looks so happy. You've done a wonderful job with her. Walter smiled and pocketed the phone. As darkness fell, they walked Maddie to Alice's car for the custody exchange. She kissed Walter goodbye, hugged Alice, and climbed into the back seat. Same time Thursday? Alice asked. Same time Thursday? Walter confirmed. He watched them drive away, then got into his own car. But instead of starting the engine immediately, he sat in the quiet darkness and thought about the past year. The Coulson family had fractured. Some pieces had fallen away entirely. Others had shifted and resettled into new configurations. A few, like Alice's father and Jason, had found their way back into Maddie's life, earned through consistent effort and genuine change. Kendra was gone. Not dead. Not even necessarily defeated. Just gone. Living somewhere else. Presumably trying to figure out who she was without her family as an audience and a support system. Walter had never sought revenge in the traditional sense. He never wanted her to suffer for suffering's sake. He just wanted his daughter to be safe, to grow up knowing that adults would protect her, not harm her, that boundaries meant something, that actions had consequences. Everything else, the family collapse, the divorces, the severed relationships, those are just the natural results of people finally being forced to see what had always been there. And Maddie was thriving. She was strong and confident and unafraid. She ran and played and laughed without the weight of fear that had once lived in her eyes. She was safe. That was all that mattered. Walter started his car and drove home through the quiet streets of Somerset Hollow. The town looked the same as it always had. Same buildings, same roads, same churches with their steeples breaking the treine. But he saw it differently now. It wasn't the place where his marriage had ended, or where his daughter had been hurt, or where a family had turned against him. It was just a town. And he was just a man who protected his child and refused to apologize for it. No drama, no rage, no endless cycles of forgiveness that let people avoid real change. Just clarity, truth, and distance. The most powerful consequences of all. Walter pulled into his driveway, walked into his small rental house, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real lasting peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything figured out or from never facing conflict or from everyone liking you. The kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing even when it was hard. Even when it cost you, even when it meant standing alone against people who wanted you to back down. He'd drawn his line, he protected what mattered, and he never once looked back. Tomorrow, Maddie would wake up in Alice's house and go to school and tell her friends about the play. Thursday, she'd come back to Walter's house and they'd have their regular routine. Life would continue in its new configuration. Messy, imperfect, but fundamentally safe. The Coulsons were no longer the center of Walter's world. They weren't even on the periphery. They were a chapter he closed, a door he'd locked, a part of his life that existed only in memory and medical records, and a faint scar on Maddie's knee from where she'd fallen that day. And that was exactly how it should be. Walter made himself dinner, watched some television, and went to bed early. No nightmares, no anxiety, no rage burning in his chest. Just sleep, deep, dreamless, peaceful sleep, the kind you earn by putting your child first and refusing to compromise on their safety, no matter what it costs. The kind that comes from knowing that when the moment came to choose between being liked and being a good father, you chose your child every single time without hesitation, without regret, and without looking back.